Grim morning and welcome to the Grim. I'm your host, Kristin. On today's episode, we'll be opening the gate and entering Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, located in Concord, Massachusetts. The aroma of coffee mingles in the air. The gates stand open. Step carefully. It's time to descend into the hauntings of history. It goes without saying that as a host of a graveyard podcast, I adore Halloween. But December, surprisingly to some, is just as beloved. The snow, lights, the hush of winter gatherings. It's a season meant for wrapping your hands around a warm mug and settling into the quiet glow of the dark. What many people overlook, however, is how deeply this season has always intertwined itself with graveyards and ghosts. Last season on The Grim, we explored the legacy of the father of Christmas himself, Charles Dickens, whose most enduring tale, A Christmas Carol, is stitched with graves, spirits, and the thin veil between life and the afterlife. The Victorians, ever enchanted by death, carried that connection even further. A visit to the cemetery on Christmas Day was tradition. They laid evergreen wreaths upon the graves of their loved ones, symbols of eternal life enduring through the cold. December may sparkle, but its roots reach deep into the shadows, right where our stories live. Sleepy Hollow isn't formal or grand like Westminster Abbey, but in many ways that's exactly what makes it perfect for graveyard tales and ghost stories. The cemetery stretches roughly 119 acres, a deliberately landscaped rural cemetery, built to feel more like a natural garden or woodland than a conventional graveyard. Behind its rolling hills, winding paths, and the wooded glens lies a peacefulness that feels both timeless and haunted. In winter, especially, when the snow muffles the ground, silhouettes of bare trees reach into the cold air, and breath becomes a visible living whisper. The place naturally invokes themes of death, remembrance, and the hush between life and whatever comes after. When the town consecrated the cemetery in 1855, the design was entrusted to landscape designers Horace W. S. Cleveland and Robert Morris Copeland. Their plan rejected the rigid, crowded graveyards of old. Instead, they embraced a green, wooded, naturalistic style. The goal was to harmonize death with nature, grief with renewal, a philosophy very much in line with the ideals of the local intellectuals. When Sleepy Hollow Cemetery was dedicated on September 29, 1855, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Concord's greatest transcendentalist voice, stood before the gathered crowd and reimagined what a burial ground could be. He called it a garden of the living, a sanctuary where death was unfolding gently into the natural world. In his telling, the cemetery wasn't merely a resting place, but a living landscape where the living could walk, reflect, and commune with the quiet presence of those who came before. Over the decades that followed its founding, Sleepy Hollow expanded with an almost organic grace. Farmland, woodland, and older burial plots were gradually folded into its rolling landscape, giving the cemetery the feel of something discovered rather than designed. It grew the way a forest grows, layer by layer, season by season, until the lines between memory and earth blurred into one continuous story. And then there's Author's Ridge in the winter, where the transcendentalists' belief reveal themselves in the starkest beauty. Bare branches reach into a washed out sky. Frost drapes itself over stones like a thin white veil. Alcott, Emerson, Thoreau, Hawthorne, names carved into granite, it's still vibrant in the pages of books. Here in the cold light of winter, the ridge feels strangely animated, as though thought itself lingers among the pines, refusing to settle. For those thinkers buried here, death was never a closed door, but part of a vast and eternal cycle. Dormancy, renewal, return. Winter at Sleepy Hollow carries that philosophy in its very bones. The hush of snow, the stillness of the earth at rest, the sense that beneath every frozen surface lies something waiting for its moment to rise again. Decay giving way to renewal, silence giving to voice. This is the rhythm of the place. Sleepy Hollow Cemetery is more than a memorial. It's a living metaphor for endings and beginnings, for grief that sleeps beneath the snow, and for the quiet hope that even in the coldest season, nothing is ever truly gone. This harmony between nature and morality appears again at one of the cemetery's central features, Cat's Pond, a man made pool shaped under the guidance of Henry David Thoreau. Reflecting on places like this, Thoreau once wrote, "In the midst of death, we are in life. noting how even the burial ground can pulse with renewal, its cycles of decay and rebirth mirroring nature itself. Winter revealed Thoreau more clearly than any other season. Its quiet austerity matched the way he moved through the world. The Walden Pond is often romanticized in warm tones of summer. Thoreau's experiment in simple living was carved out in the cold. Two brutal New England winters pressed against the thin walls of his one room cabin, and he met them armed with a pencil, a journal, and an unrelenting curiosity about the Earth's rhythms. He wrote of the frozen pond as if it were a breathing, living thing, its surface groaning and shifting beneath sheets of ice. He watched ice harvesters carve massive blocks from Walden's surface, blocks that would vanish months later as meltwater in Calcutta. The pure Walden water is mingled with the sacred water of the Ganges, he observed. No metaphor, but a simple, astonishing truth. Walden's winter traveled farther than he ever did. In the pond in winter, Thoreau described measuring ice depth, the sharp clarity of the frozen landscape, and the way the world, stripped of the bone in silence, took on an almost sacred quality. Winter, he believed, didn't quiet nature, it sharpened her voice, asking us to listen more closely. Thoreau's journals are filled with dates, times, and quiet revelations: when the first geese returned, when the ice cracked, when the fruit ripened on the branch. He wanted to anticipate the seasons, to become so fluent in nature's language that he could predict its next move. Winter fascinated him the most: the stillness, the dormancy, the hidden life waiting beneath the snow. His brother John died in his arms during a bleak winter in 1842 after a simple shaving cut turned to tetanus, a loss that shaped Thoreau's sense of fragility and the thin veil between life and death. Perhaps this grief sharpened his eye for winter's quiet truths. Thoreau's obsession with recording every detail of the world around him didn't just shape his journals. It helped him quite literally engineer a better pencil. His family owned a pencil factory in Concord, where he spent years refining the craft. After studying European manufacturing techniques, he reverse engineered a new blend of graphite and clay in 1843, producing pencils that wrote more cleanly and consistently than most made in America at the time. There was always something unusual, though, about Thoreau, even from the beginning. Born David Henry Thoreau, he quietly reversed his name to Henry David after college, an oddly deliberate gesture he never bothered to legalize. In 1844, he accidentally sparked a fire that consumed nearly 300 acres of Walden woods, only to return a year later seeking peace from those same scorched trees. And when asked late in life whether he had made his peace with God, he answered with his characteristic calm: "I did not know we had ever quarreled." His life is full of memories like these, sharp edges and soft mysteries, leaving him both approachable and elusive. Thoreau's mind worked in its own distant cadence. He observed with an intensity that bordered on the uncanny, noticing patterns and particulars most people passed over. Today, some might interpret these qualities as a neurodivergent tendencies. In his own time, they were simply part of his strange, luminous genius. Thoreau was often pictured alone by the pond, but winters in Concord saw him take on a far riskier role. He aided enslaved people fleeing north through the Underground Railroad. Winter crossings were treacherous. Frozen rivers offered silent passage, but frostbite stalked every mile. Still, Thoreau guided those who sought freedom, letting his own convictions outweigh the dangers of snow, darkness, and cold. In 1860, Thoreau ventured into a cold late night rainstorm to count tree rings, a small obsession and routine curiosity of his. The exposure triggered bronchitis that already worsened his ongoing issue with tuberculosis. Through the winter of 1861 to 1862, he lay mostly bedridden, his room bright with the white of drifting snow, and the scattered manuscripts he continued to revise. Even as his lungs failed, he raced about the season, writing as if time could be slowed by attention. But nothing could stop his failing health. On May 6, 1862, his body finally gave out. Thoreau was first buried in the Dunbar family plot, then moved to Author's Ridge in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. In New England winters, visitors still climb the ridge to leave pencils on his snow covered grave, an offering to both his craft and his family's. The world falls quiet here, though, and the pines hold their breath. This is in the frozen hush that his most famous line feels especially haunting. echoing across a landscape he spent his life deciphering. I went to the woods because I wanted to live deliberately, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. And so he didn't. Thoreau was consumed by tuberculosis, a family curse that claimed all four siblings. His final words were as cryptic and wind whispered as his life. "Now comes good sailing," he said softly, followed by the strange utterance, "Moose Indian." Perhaps he was already stepping into the otherworldly winter he had spent his life preparing for. Not far from Thoreau's resting place on Author's Ridge lies another figure shaped by Concord's winters, Louisa May Alcott. If Thoreau sought solitude, Louisa was forged in struggle. Yet both shared a belief that even in winter's coldest months, something vital still stirs beneath the snow. Louisa grew up under the same stark New England skies, daughter of Bronson Alcott, a philosopher who prized ideals over income. She was born on his birthday, November 29th, a winter child entering a household more familiar with drafts and thin blankets than comfort. Emerson, Hawthorne, and Thoreau himself drifted in and out of her childhood like wandering constellations. They taught her, challenged her, and helped shape the imagination that would one day warm millions. But winter in all its forms stalked Louisa from the start. Before Little Women became a classic, its most cherished moment, four sisters giving away their Christmas breakfast to a starving family, was something Louisa May Alcott had lived long before she wrote it. The Alcotts rarely had more than bread and prayer in December, yet her father still sent his daughters into the frosted morning with baskets for families even poorer than they were. Louisa later described Christmas not as a season of gifts, but as a season of small sacrifices, a quiet ember of generosity she carried all her life, the bit of winter warmth glowing at the heart of Little Women. Years later, at 30 years old, Louisa volunteered as a Civil War nurse. It was winter in Washington, wet, cold, and thick with fever and blood. She tended the wreckage of Fredericksburg, young men mangled, delirious, fading by the hour. She worked on the night watch, moving through rows of cots like a restless spirit who refused to sleep. After 6 relentless weeks, her body gave way. She collapsed with typhoid pneumonia. The army treated her with calomel, a mercury compound meant to purge sickness, and a common treatment at the time. Instead, though, it poisoned her. Louisa hallucinated fire, persecution, witches, visions with a gothic edge she never fully shook. When her father brought her home, she barely recognized him. The mercury stayed with her for the next 20 years. Vertigo, pain, exhaustion. Nights eased only by opium, and still she wrote on. In 1868, still weak from illness, Louisa wrote Little Women in just 2.5 months. She often worked from her bed, wrapped in blankets, her breath visible in the cold. Jo March became the lively, rebellious version of herself she could no longer be. The book sold out immediately, just in time for Christmas. For the first time, the Alcotts could heat their home. Winter no longer had the power to starve them. But the success that saved her family couldn't save her body. The orchard house where the Alcotts lived and Louisa's famous novel is based at still stands today in Concord and is open to the public for tours. Louisa's life held shadows she rarely let into the stories she wrote for young readers. Behind the gentle moral world she crafted, she harbored a secret love for the lurid and sensational. Thrillers pulsing with obsession and danger. "I fancy lurid things," she once confessed. A glimpse into the darker corridor of her imagination. She became the first woman to register to vote in Concord. When her sister May died in Paris after childbirth, Louisa took in the infant daughter Lulu, raising her as her own. Near the end of her life, she requested that her letters and journals be burned, and sadly, only a few escaped the flames. The woman who gave the world its coziest Christmas scenes kept her own darker candle burning out of sight. In early 1888, Louisa entered a convalescent home, convinced she had years left to live. But winter returned one final time. On March 1st, she visited her father as he lay dying. "Father," she whispered, "here is your Louis. What are you thinking of so happily?" Bronson Alcott pointed upward. "I am going up," he said. "Come with me." He died on March 4th. Louisa followed on March 6th. Born on his birthday, she died 2 days after him, as though drawn into the same winter light. The mercury that had lived in her blood for 25 years finally silenced her heart. Today, Louisa lies across her parents' feet in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, fulfilling her wish to support them in death and life. Her marker is small, often nearly swallowed by snow. Visitors, though, leave pine cones, flowers, and handmade paper stars at Christmas time, quiet tokens of tenderness she gave the world, even while carrying so much of its cold. But the ridge holds darker stories too, and none cast a longer shadow than Nathaniel Hawthorne. Nathaniel Hawthorne entered the world on a summer July morning in Salem in 1804, but brightness was never the whole of his story. Even in childhood, he seemed to live at the edge of two worlds, the living one around him and the older, heavier one carried on by his family name. His bloodline included Judge John Hawthorne, one of the unrepentant interrogators at the Salem witch trials. His legacy haunted the Hawthorne home like an unspoken curse. Sometimes in his youth, Nathaniel quietly inserted a W into his surname, a small act of rebellion or perhaps an attempt at exorcism, a way to soften the echo of the judge's name without ever truly escaping it. When he was only 4 years old, tragedy carved its first mark. His father, Captain Nathaniel Hawthorne, died of yellow fever during a voyage in Suriname. The loss forced his mother, Elizabeth, into a half widowed seclusion. She withdrew from the world, raising her children within the protective gloom of their relatives' home. Nathaniel grew into a solitary boy, spending much of his time reading, roaming the woods, and nursing an injury from a childhood accident that left him temporarily unable to walk. Isolation became both a companion and muse. In 1821, he entered Bowdoin College, where his classmates included future President Franklin Pierce and poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Even among such luminaries, Hawthorne remained quiet, introspective, a shadow at the edge of the room. Yet these friendships shaped his life for decades. After graduating in 1825, he returned to Salem and entered what he would call his 12 dark years, a period of intense seclusion in the family home, writing by candlelight, venturing out little, and struggling to earn recognition. During this period, he produced his first novel, Fanshawe, a work he disliked so intensely he attempted to destroy every copy he could find later in life. But the shadows yielded fruit. Through the 1830s, magazines began publishing his short stories. Young Goodman Brown, My Kingsman, The Minister's Black Veil. They brimmed with Puritan guilt, moral dread, and the psychological terror of inherited sin, themes that would later define him. In 1837, these tales were gathered into Twice Told Tales, the book that finally earned him attention. Still, Hawthorne struggled financially. He worked at the Boston Customs House, briefly joined the utopian Brook Farm community, more out of economic desperation than idealistic fever, and eventually found stability through love. In 1842, he married Sophia Peabody, a painter and transcendentalist whose warmth counterbalanced his brooding nature. They moved into the Old Manse in Concord, where Hawthorne wrote Moses from an Old Manse and befriended Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and Bronson Alcott. Though surrounded by transcendentalists, Hawthorne remained skeptical of their optimism. He was always drawn more deeply to what lay beneath the surface of the human soul. His greatest works emerged after his return to Salem in 1846, when he became surveyor of the port at the Customs House. He lost the position in 1848, embittered by local politics, but the dismissal ignited something in him. By 1850, he produced The Scarlet Letter, a novel steeped in Puritan shame, public punishment, and the slow rot of a secret guilt. It was followed swiftly by The House of the Seven Gables, a ghost hunted tale of ancestral crime and the architectural memory, and The Blithedale Romance, and then a biography of his friend Franklin Pierce, written to help Pierce's presidential campaign. When Pierce won, he rewarded Hawthorne with the appointment as a U.S. consul in Liverpool. The position brought financial relief but drained Hawthorne's energy. He traveled extensively through England and Italy, gathering inspiration for his final completed novel, The Marble Faun, a story steeped in art, sin, redemption, and the eerie ancientness of Rome. Returning to America, Hawthorne found himself dimming, physically, creatively, and spiritually. He began several novels but abandoned them. His once prolific imagination flickered like a dying candle. In the early 1860s, friends noticed the change too, a gauntness, an exhaustion, and a sense that he was slipping into some private darkness. On May 19th, 1846, while traveling through New Hampshire with Franklin Pierce, Hawthorne died in his sleep in Plymouth. He was 59 years old. His body was carried back to Concord and laid to rest on Author's Ridge in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, not far from Emerson, Thoreau, and the Alcotts. Among them, his grave feels uniquely somber, as though even in death he remains the one still listening for the echoes of the past. Nathaniel Hawthorne didn't merely write about guilt, sin, and the ghosts of New England. He inherited them, carried them, and wove them into the very architecture of American storytelling. His life was a testament to the truth that the past never dies. Before the Ridge became a shrine for wandering readers and cold fingered pilgrims, it belonged to one man's imagination, Ralph Waldo Emerson. He didn't merely write about nature, he shaped the very landscape where he now sleeps. Emerson was born in Boston on May 25th, 1803, but it was Concord, its pines, its water, its long contemplative winters that claimed him. He walked its woods until it became an extension of his own inner world. To him, winter was not a season of death, but a kind of purification, a stripping away of noise until only the essential remained. In nature, he wrote of entering the snow covered forest and feeling himself become a transparent eyeball, a strange unblinking soul through which the cold universe passed. It was less metaphor than confession. Emerson believed the world spoke most clearly in quiet places, and winter offered the deepest quiet of all. When Sleepy Hollow Cemetery was dedicated in 1855, Emerson delivered the address. He imagined a burial ground that wouldn't imitate churchyards of stone and sorrow, but a natural sanctuary where the living walked alongside the dead and felt continuity, not rupture, between earth and spirit. He spoke of nature's solemnity and the healing that came from wandering beneath trees rather than monuments. It was Emerson's vision that made Sleepy Hollow less a cemetery and more forested philosophy, a place where death feels like a part of a larger conversation. In person, Emerson seemed carved from New England granite, stoic, calm, luminous in a way that unsettled those who expected a minister and found instead a mystic. He preached self reliance, not as defiance, but as duty, an instance that every soul must listen for its own inner bell in the dark. His essays carried a kind of winter clarity, sharp, reflective, stripped of ornament. Trust thyself, he wrote, a sentence as crisp as frost on a pane. Yet beneath the clarity lived a softer truth. He saw connection, not isolation, enlightenment, not escape. Age, however, brought a slow dimming. Emerson suffered from memory loss, moments of mental fog, winters of the mind. Words slipped away from the man who had once commanded them like constellations. Friends noticed how he paused, searching for thoughts that wouldn't return. Ralph Waldo Emerson died on April 27th, 1882, at 78. Taken by pneumonia, lungs filling, breath thinning, as if the winter he loved finally asked him to rest. Concord fell silent, bells tolled, neighbors lined the roads as his coffin passed. They buried him in the very cemetery he imagined decades earlier, beneath towering pines and shifting light. His grave is marked not by a sculpted monument, but by a massive, unpolished boulder of rose quartz. Raw, elemental, a stone that looks as though the earth pushed it up just for him. Today, snow gathers in pink crystals on that quartz surface, blurring the carved letters of his name. Visitors leave pine branches, scraps of poetry, worn copies of Self Reliance. In winter, the gifts freeze in place, preserving them like offerings in a glass case of ice. Standing by Emerson's grave, you can look just a few steps away and see Thoreau's small marker. Further down, Alcott's narrow stone tucked into the snow, and Hawthorne's. The winter wind moves through the pines above them, a single breath passing through four lives that shaped American thought. The grounds hold another special grave, though, tied to Christmas, one you've heard of in the form of a tune. The Little Drummer Boy has echoed through every holiday season of our lives, its steady beat woven into December itself. And we owe that melody to Catherine Kennicott Davis, who now rests here in Sleepy Hollow. Originally born in Missouri, Davis studied at Wellesley College in Massachusetts before continuing her training at the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston. She traveled briefly to Paris to refine her craft, then returned to Concord, where she taught music and quietly composed an astonishing body of work, more than 600 pieces over her lifetime. She wasn't Concord's only Christmas musical influence buried within Sleepy Hollow. Thomas Whitney Surratt, founder of the Surratt School of Music in Concord in the early 1900s, left a lasting mark on the town's musical life. He began the cherished tradition of singing Christmas carols around Concord's Christmas tree on Christmas Eve, a custom that continues to echo through the town's wintry nights to this very day. In the quiet hills of Concord, where the frost clings to the bare branches and the shadows stretch long across stone, Daniel Chester French rests, his own artful hand forever shaping the memory of a nation. Born in 1850 in Exeter, New Hampshire, French entered a world of intellect and ambition. A father who was a lawyer and an author, a mother descended from a chief justice, and a family steeped in civic duty. From childhood, he seemed attuned to the invisible threads that bind life and legacy, a sensitivity that would guide him towards sculpting forms that speak across generations. When his family moved to Concord in 1867, French became a neighbor and friend to the literary titans of the town, including Ralph Waldo Emerson and the Alcotts. Along the quiet streets and rolling fields of Massachusetts, he drew inspiration from both the natural world and the minds of those around him. His education was a careful blend of observation and craft, studying anatomy under William Rimmer, drawing with William Morris Hunt, a year at MIT, and later years in Florence, Italy. Immersed in the studio of Thomas Ball, French's works first started with the Minuteman statue in Concord, unveiled on the centennial of the battles of Lexington and Concord. From there, his hand shaped history and memory alike. John Harvard at Harvard University, bronze doors for the Boston Public Library, the Statue of the Republic for the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, and the Four Continents at the U.S. Customs House in New York. He sculpted monuments to George Washington in Paris, General Grant in Philadelphia, and the statue of Joseph Hooker in Boston. Yet among all his triumphs, the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. remains his crowning achievement. A figure of quiet dignity, sorrow, and hope cast in stone, gazing out over the nation he helped immortalize. French's work also extended to commemorative medals and smaller honors. He co designed the Pulitzer Prize Gold Medal, crafted intimate portraits, and collaborated with architects such as Henry Bacon to ensure his sculptures harmonized with the spaces they inhabited. Throughout his career, he helped found the National Sculpture Society, taught new generations of sculptors, and received international acclaim. Yet, even amidst recognition, there was a measured humility in his work, a careful attention to the lives, griefs, and victories of those he portrayed. French died in 1931 at his home in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. He left behind not only a nation adorned with his sculptures, but a quiet legacy of reverence for the human spirit, a hand that shaped history and memory alike. Today, visitors in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery can pass his resting place and sense the same solemn grace that flows through his art. A reminder that even in stone, life, sorrow, and honor endure. In the hush of winter, not far from French himself, is French's Melvin Memorial, previously known as Morning Victory. A central figure, Morning Victory, draped in the American flag and bearing a laurel, gazes downward, her sorrow tempered by honor. Commissioned to honor three brothers from Concord who gave their lives in the Civil War, the sculpture embodies the delicate balance of grief and hope, mourning and memory. In the pale winter light, her presence is once somber and comforting, a reminder that loss, though heavy, can be transformed into reverence and remembrance. Sleepy Hollow Cemetery is home to a remarkable tapestry of lives that shaped American history, culture, and imagination. Nathaniel Hawthorne, author of The Scarlet Letter, lies alongside his wife, Sophia Hawthorne, a talented painter and illustrator. The cemetery also holds military and political figures, from Frederick Heilegger of Easy Company during World War II to Charles A.P. Bartlett, a World War I Army captain and Pennsylvania state senator. 19th century politicians Ebenezer R. Hoar and George Frisbee Hoar are also within. George Washington Wright, California's first representative in Congress, and Ralph Horsman, the first territorial forester of Hawaii, are also among these historic graves. Visionaries in education, literature, and reform are also plentiful within. Elizabeth Peabody, the pioneering education reformer, Franklin Benjamin Sanborn, a social reformer and author, Harriet Lucy Robinson Shattuck, a suffragist and an authority on parliamentary law, Mary Lemus Titcomb, who founded the Bookmobile, and Mary Coleman Wheeler, founder of the Wheeler School. Creative minds and cultural innovators rest here as well. James Underwood Crockett, the gardener and host of the Victory Garden, Mark Daniels, director of I Love Lucy and the original Star Trek series, Richard Morris, a historian and novelist, Robin Moore, author of The Green Berets and The French Connection, and Ralph Monroe, yacht designer and pioneer of South Florida. Ephraim Wales Bull, creator of the Concord grape, also rest within. Among these graves, the echoes of thought, service, and artistry linger, transforming the cemetery into a quiet archive of ambition, loss, and enduring legacy. A place where winter's hush seems to deepen the resonance of every life remembered. For all its ties to Christmas and winter, Sleepy Hollow seems curiously lacking in ghosts or hauntings. Amateur paranormal investigators or enthusiasts have claimed to photograph orbs, sense presence, or feel an eerie energy while walking the cemetery at dusk or night, but no clear reports of an actual haunting exist. Visitors who try in vain to connect with the spirits on Author's Ridge often lean gloomy and ghostless. Perhaps, as in life, the writers keep to their quiet solitude on the ridge, letting their thoughts and stories drift silently into the cold air. On a crisp December day, visitors can pause to warm themselves with a peppermint white hot chocolate from Hot, savoring the comforting favors while wandering the serene grounds, which the Grim highly recommends. This season, we haven't been featuring the local Grim Grinds. We're curious, have you missed them? Here at the Grim, we love supporting local and small businesses, and we're endlessly grateful for the creators who keep our communities vibrant. As a small niche podcast with almost no ads, we're woman owned and entirely out of pocket supported, which means we don't make a profit at all. The Grim might not be everyone's favorite podcast, but if you have a favorite, consider finding ways to support your local creators, whether they're just around the corner or a stream away. You can find links on www.the-grim.com to purchase a grave grind, cozy merch, or otherwise support our show. We're truly grateful for every listener, every click, and every sip shared with us. It's what keeps our little haunt alive. For now, the stories of Sleepy Hollow Cemetery slip back into stone, and the dead return to their uneasy rest. Yet they're never silent for long. Thank you for walking with us through the veil into Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, descending once more into the hauntings of history. The gate is sealed, the veil drawn, yet death keeps no calendar, and so we shall return, as we always do, on the Grim.